The silverware rattled against 52 porcelain plates, but the sound that stopped my heart was the heavy, polished brass of Aunt Evelyn's ring striking her crystal glass. She abandoned this family. Evelyn's voice shattered the formal silence of the Oakridge Manor dining room. Her eyes locked onto me like crosshairs. 51 heads turned, their faces a blurring wall of silent judgment, as my mother, sitting beside me with a hand trembling over her pearl necklace, refused to meet my gaze. 4 years, Sarah? 4 years you hid in your cozy overseas bubble while your brother's widow raised his child alone, and now you walk into this memorial dinner demanding his estate? If this story makes your blood boil as fast as mine did that night, hit subscribe right now, because what Evelyn didn't know was that the shadow standing at the back of the room had just unlocked his phone. The air in the room dried up instantly. I didn't reach for my water. My fingers stayed pinned flat against the mahogany table, tracing the distinct circular indentation where my late brother Marcus used to rest his deployment coin. I knew that indentation well. I'd carved it under his guidance when we were kids. "I didn't abandon anyone, Sarah," I said, my voice low, dropping the precise 8 beats I used to use when studying a radio signal during Stormwatch in the Signal Corps. "I was honorably discharged 3 weeks ago, and every cent of my survivor allotment was wired directly into Marcus's trust." "Liar," screamed Clara from the head of the table, clutching Marcus's 7-year-old daughter Leo to her chest so tightly the girl minced. Clara, my brother's widow, wore black velvet that looked far too expensive for someone claiming to be destitute. "You never sent a dime. The court records show the house was foreclosed because the mortgage went unpaid for 18 months. You let us drown." A collective gasp swept through the guests, but before I could unseal my lips, the massive double doors at the back of the dining hall clicked open. The heavy leather soles of standard-issue dress shoes echoed against the hardwood floor. A tall man in a tailored charcoal suit walked in, his broad shoulders carrying the indisputable posture of active federal authority. He didn't look at the decor, the caterers, or the 52 stunned guests. He looked directly at the brass clock ticking above the fireplace, then pulled a pale blue manila folder from his leather briefcase. "Sarah Miller?" the agent asked, his voice cutting through the rising whispers like a scalpel. "I'm Sarah," I said, standing up slowly, keeping my hands visible on the table. "Who are you?" "Special Agent Vance, Financial Crimes Division," he said, stepping into the warm glow of the chandelier. He didn't offer a hand. Instead, he placed a single laminated document on the white linen tablecloth right in front of Evelyn. "This is a private memorial dinner for my deceased nephew. Get out of my house before I call the chief of police." "You can't call him, Mrs. Vance," the agent replied, calmly, resting his palm on the back of a chair. "He's currently standing on your front porch with 2 uniformed officers executing a search warrant for your home office." My mother finally looked up, her knuckles white around her napkin. "Evelyn, what is he talking about? You told me Sarah stole the trust funds." "Mom, shut up," Clara snapped, her fragile widow persona slipping for a microsecond into raw, venomous fury. She shoved little Leo toward the nanny standing near the kitchen doors. "Agent Vance, this is a misunderstanding. My husband's sister has been harassing me since she returned stateside. She brought him here to humiliate us." "I didn't bring him," I said, my tone flat, unbothered, and cold. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small, heavy brass key, the old spare key to Marcus's desk at the armory that he'd mailed to me 6 days before he died in a training accident. "I didn't call the FBI, Clara. Marcus did. 4 years ago." The room seemed to tilt. Evelyn slammed both palms onto the table, her diamond rings clicking against the wood. "Marcus has been dead for 14 months, you delusional snake. Stop hiding behind a dead soldier's name." "He is dead," Agent Vance confirmed, opening his blue folder. "But his automated whistleblower packet wasn't set to release to our bureau until his estate reached its final probate deadline, which happens to be tonight at midnight. And according to the military banking records attached to Captain Marcus Miller's file, every single check Sarah sent from her overseas post was intercepted.
Intercepted by whom? My mother whispered, her voice cracking as she stared between Evelyn and Clara. By the executor of the trust, Agent Vance said, turning his cold gaze directly onto Evelyn, who redirected those funds into a private shell account registered under the name Oakridge Restoration Funds, an account that paid off the mortgage of this very manor 3 weeks ago. A wave of hushed outrage spilled across the 52 guests. Evelyn's chest bounced with frantic breath. That's a lie. I took out a private loan to save this estate. I sacrificed everything for this family while Sarah was off playing soldier. Then why, I interrupted, leaning forward over the table, is your name listed as the sole beneficiary on Marcus's secondary military life insurance policy, a policy that was altered 48 hours after his funeral using a digital signature from a computer logged in right here at Oakridge Manor? Clara froze. She slowly turned her head toward Evelyn, her eyes wide with a horrific realization. What? Evelyn, you told me there was no secondary policy. You said the military only paid the standard death gratuity. Keep your mouth shut, Clara, hissed Evelyn, her poise collapsing into sheer paranoia. No, Clara shrieked, knocking over her glass of red wine, which pooled across the pristine white linen like blood. You silly, greedy little girl, Evelyn snarled, her voice dropping all pretense of maternal elegance. You think you're innocent? Who gave me his laptop passcode the night he died? The dining room went dead quiet. 52 people sat suspended in sheer disbelief. The narrative had completely flipped in less than 3 minutes. The selfless matriarch and the grieving widow were tearing each other apart over the carcass of a secret they thought they'd buried with my brother. I didn't flinch. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a small black-cased flash drive, and placed it next to the brass key on the table. Agent Vance looked at the drive, then up at me. Is that the secondary mirror? It is, I said. Marcus didn't just mail me a key, Agent Vance. He mailed me the serial numbers to the encrypted drives he kept in his armory locker, the ones detailing the offshore accounts Evelyn used to launder money out of his unit's local community charity. Evelyn laughed, a harsh, dry sound that rattled her throat. You think a stupid flash drive proves anything? Digital evidence is easily fabricated, Sarah. Any half-wit attorney will have that thrown out of court before breakfast. You have nothing. You walked in here trying to destroy my reputation, but I built this family. I don't need the drive to destroy your reputation, Evelyn, I said softly, my eyes narrowing as I locked onto her panicked gaze. I only needed you to confess in front of 52 federal donors who just watched you admit to evidence tampering, bank fraud, and extortion. Evelyn snapped her head around the room. The local mayor, 2 Supreme Court judges, and the regional bank president were all sitting at the long table, their expressions turned to ice. Agent Vance, Evelyn stammered, her voice suddenly small and trembling. She's manipulating you. Sarah was discharged dishonorably. Ask her why she really left the army. My mother gasped, clutching her heart. Oh God, Sarah, is that true? I stood there, feeling the weight of 52 pairs of eyes drilling into my spine. The truth was a blade, and I'd been bleeding from it for 3 years. Tell them, Evelyn screamed, standing tall, a maniacal grin spreading across her face as she sensed a desperate victory. Tell your mother why you were stripped of your rank. Tell her about the missing equipment in Stuttgart. Agent Vance didn't look surprised. He simply flipped a page in his folder. Captain Sarah Miller wasn't dishonorably discharged, Mrs. Vance. Her discharge was reclassified 6 days ago under Section 1057 of the Military Whistleblower Protection Act. Evelyn's smile faltered. What? She didn't steal equipment, Vance continued, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. She intentionally drew the investigation toward herself to protect the paper trail Marcus was building from inside the Defense Logistics Network. She took the administrative fall so your legal team wouldn't realize the federal government was already monitoring the Oakridge accounts. My mother burst into tears, covering her face with her trembling hands. "Oh God, Sarah, you ruined your career for us?" "I didn't do it for you, Mom. I did it because Marcus discovered what Evelyn did to Dad 10 years ago." The temperature in the room plummeted to sub-zero. Evelyn took a step back, her heel catching on the edge of the oriental rug. "Don't you dare bring your father into this."
Dad didn't die of a heart attack, did he, Evelyn? I stepped out from behind the table, taking one slow, deliberate step toward her. He discovered that you were using Oakridge Manor to fake nonprofit receipts, and when he threatened to go to the state prosecutor, his medication miraculously disappeared from his bedside table. "That's murder slander," Evelyn shrieked, her hand swinging wildly toward Agent Vance. "Arrest her! Arrest this crazy woman!" "We don't need to arrest her for slander," Agent Vance said, reaching into his inner coat pocket and pulling out a set of steel handcuffs. "Because 30 minutes ago, the state police exhumed your brother's medical records following a court order granted by Judge Miller, who happens to be sitting at the end of this table. Judge Miller, a white-haired man who had known my father for 40 years, stood up slowly. He didn't say a word. He just looked at Evelyn with absolute disgust and shook his head. "You took everything from this family," I said, stopping inches away from Evelyn. My voice didn't shake, my hands didn't tremble. "You took Dad's life, you took Marcus's peace, and you tried to take my honor. But military training teaches you one thing above all else, Evelyn. Never attack a position unless you know what's buried beneath it." The double doors swung open again. 2 uniformed state troopers stepped inside, walking past the frozen caterers and the paralyzed guests. Evelyn looked around the room, searching frantically for a single face that showed sympathy. She found none. Clara had pulled Leo behind her, backing into the corner of the room, sobbing in terror as she realized her own complicity was about to be stripped bare in open court. My mother sat frozen, staring at the empty space where my father's portrait hung on the wall, the scales finally falling from her eyes. "Sarah," Evelyn whispered, her voice cracking as the first trooper took her by the wrist. "Please, we're blood." "Blood doesn't make a family, Evelyn," I whispered back, watching the cold steel click over her thin, manicured wrist. "Truth does." As the troopers escorted Evelyn out of the manor, the heavy brass clock above the mantel chimed midnight. The room remained completely silent, except for the quiet, steady rhythm of my own breathing. The storm had passed, the lies were ashes, and for the first time in 4 long years, I walked out of Oakridge Manor completely free.